The photograph was face down in the snow at the edge of the parking lot, which was the only reason it had survived. Face up, it would have been destroyed within an hour. The February light in Whitefish, Montana was thin but direct, and the temperature was rising by mid-morning, and a photograph left face up in melting snow is a photograph being erased. Face down, it had been protected, the image pressed against the cold and held there by whatever providence arranges the small acts of preservation that change everything downstream. Staff Sergeant Cole Drake saw it because Cerberus stopped walking. Not a full alert, just a pause. The 3-second stillness Cerberus used when something in the immediate environment didn't fit the expected pattern. His nose angled down and his ears tracking forward, and his amber eyes fixed on the white rectangle in the snow with the patient, methodical attention of a dog that had learned to distinguish between what was nothing and what merely looked like nothing. Cole crouched and picked it up and turned it over. A man and a woman, young, late 20s, early 30s, standing in front of a house with a covered porch and a mountain behind it that Cole recognized immediately as the south face of Whitefish Mountain. The man had his arm around the woman's shoulders, and she was looking not at the camera, but at him, with the specific, unguarded expression that people have when they do not know they are being watched, and the feeling they are feeling is entirely their own. On the back, in faded blue ink, in a woman's careful handwriting, Frank and me. First winter, 1974. Cole stood with the photograph in his hand in the February cold and looked around the parking lot, at the cars, at the businesses along the street, at the direction the wind was coming from. He did not know yet whose this was. He did not know yet that finding it was going to matter in the way that some small acts of recovery turn out to matter, not in proportion to the size of the thing recovered, but in proportion to what that thing is carrying. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end, because what Cole found when that photograph led him to the house on Birchwood Lane, and what Cerberus understood the moment he walked through the door, will change how you look at what gets lost and what gets found. We read every comment. We want to know how far this story travels. Cole Drake was 39 years old and carried himself the way men carry themselves, who have stopped performing anything, not the aggressive stillness of someone trying to project control, but the genuine, settled quietness of a man who had run out of reasons to be something other than what he was. He was 6 feet tall and built with the compact economy of a long-distance runner rather than the square solidity of men who spent time in weight rooms, lean and precise through the frame, with dark hair that had gone noticeably silver at the right temple in the past 18 months, and that he had not thought about, because he had other things to think about. His face was angular and weathered from years at altitude and in wind and sun, with deep-set eyes the color of old timber, a dark, warm brown that held its quality of depth regardless of lighting, and the kind of jaw that had been set in concentration so often it had learned to rest there. He was not a serious man in the way that made other people uncomfortable. He was serious about the things that deserved seriousness, which was a different quality entirely, and he had enough experience with the consequences of insufficient seriousness that he no longer confused the two. He had served 3 deployments with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, Helmand Province in 2009, Sungin in 2012, and a 3rd rotation through the Korengal Valley in 2014 that had lasted 9 months, and from which he had come home with a Bronze Star and a separated shoulder that had required 2 surgeries and that still ached on cold mornings in the specific, reliable way of damage that has been repaired but not undone. He had completed his enlistment in 2016 and made the decision to separate with the measured honesty of a man who understood that the service had been the thing he was built for, and that being built for something did not mean you were required to give it everything you had forever, that there were other things worth building. He had come to Whitefish because the mountains were the right kind of mountains, not intimidating, not spectacular in the way that drew crowds, but serious. The kind that made demands of the people who lived near them and rewarded those who met the demands with a quality of life that had no equivalent he had found elsewhere. He ran a small outdoor guide operation, seasonal, and filled the off months with property maintenance contracts. He walked every morning with Cerberus. He was learning, slowly and without forcing it, that the shape of a life built from scratch was its own form of discipline, and one he was not bad at. Cerberus was a 7-year-old German shepherd, with a coat the color of iron gray deepening to black along the spine and ears, with a pale cream chest that gave him an unusual, almost severe coloring that people noticed, and that Cerberus appeared to have no opinion about one way or the other. He weighed 83 pounds and moved with the low, ground-covering precision of a dog whose relationship with his environment was entirely functional, not show, not performance. Just the complete and uncomplicated mastery of a body doing exactly what it was designed to do. His left ear carried a thin diagonal scar from base to tip where a fragment had crossed it in the Korengal in 2014. Not a notch, but a line, healed to a pale seam through the gray fur that in certain lights looked almost decorative, and that Cerberus wore with the same total indifference he wore everything. He navigated the world in a permanent state of quiet environmental intake, reading scent and sound and the behavioral patterns of people and animals with the systematic thoroughness of a dog for whom the world was an unending data stream. All of it relevant until demonstrated otherwise. Cole had spent 5 months fighting the military working dog adoption process, and had made 3 formal appeals, and had called the office of a senator from Montana who had served in the Marines, and who, when Cole explained the situation, had made 1 phone call of his own. Cerberus had been in Cole's house for 25 months. He was the most honest relationship Cole had. Whitefish in February smelled of wood smoke, and the cold that came off Flathead Lake when the wind was from the southwest. A specific wet cold different from the dry mountain cold, layered and persistent in the way of cold that has settled in for the season and does not intend to be apologetic about it. The main street was quiet at 7:45, a few early commuters. The coffee shop open and lit, the hardware store dark. The parking lot where Cole had been walking was behind the small grocery at the end of the block, and he stood in it now with the photograph in his gloved hand, and Cerberus at his knee, looking at the image with the same attentive stillness he had given it on the ground. Cole did what he would have done with any piece of lost property. He took it to the most logical point of congregation. Sandra at the coffee shop had been open for 40 minutes and knew, as people who have worked a neighborhood coffee counter long enough always know, most of what moved through the immediate vicinity of their block. She looked at the photograph, looked at the mountain in the background, and said she thought that was the old Harmon place on Birchwood Lane, but that it had been the Beaumont place for a long time now, and that Cole should ask at the hardware store because Ed had been in Whitefish since 1979 and would know. Ed confirmed it. The house on Birchwood Lane had belonged to Frank and Irene Beaumont. Frank had died the previous October. Irene was still there. Ed said this with the particular economy of a man reporting a fact he had not been asked to evaluate, but that Cole could evaluate however he chose. Cole drove to Birchwood Lane. The house was the one in the photograph, and was also not the one in the photograph in the way that 50 years of life changes the physical premises of a place. The covered porch was the same. The mountain behind was the same. But the maples along the front walk had grown from saplings to full trees that arched over the path, and the paint had been renewed several times, and the garden along the south face of the house was dormant under the snow, but had the look of something tended carefully for decades. Cole sat in the truck for a moment before getting out, not hesitating, reading the premises the way he had been trained to read them, building the picture. The driveway had 1 set of tire tracks coming in, none going out. The front walk had not been shoveled after the last snowfall, which had been 3 days ago. The porch light was on, though it was 9 in the morning. He went to the door with the photograph in his hand, and Cerberus at his side. The woman who answered was 78 years old and had the particular quality of a person who had recently been through the kind of loss that reorganizes everything that comes after it, and who was still in the reorganizing, not broken, not absent, but operating in the specific, careful way of someone who is managing the new weight of things one task at a time. She was small and sharp, featured with white hair cut short and gray eyes that were clear and direct and did not conceal their assessment behind social softening. She was wearing a cardigan over a flannel shirt, and her hands, when she took the photograph, did not shake, but went completely still, the way hands go still when they have received something they were not prepared to receive. Her name was Irene Beaumont. She had been married to Frank Beaumont for 51 years. Frank had died in October of a heart attack that had come while he was splitting wood in the side yard on a Tuesday morning. Sudden, the doctor had said, which Irene had come to understand was a mercy for Frank and a complexity for her, because suddenness left nothing to prepare for, and nothing prepared. They had come to Whitefish in 1973, the year before the photograph was taken, because Frank had been offered a position with the Flathead County Forestry Service, and they had driven up from Missoula and seen the mountain, and that had been the end of the discussion. Frank had worked forestry for 31 years and had known every trail above 8,000 feet in the Whitefish Range by name, and had taken Irene up most of them over the decades in the particular way of people who share a landscape the way other people share a language. They had 2 children, a son in Seattle, a daughter in Chicago. Both had come for the funeral. Both had gone back. Cole sat in the kitchen with Irene's coffee, dark roast, strong, the way it should be, while Cerberus lay under the table with his chin on the floor between his paws and one amber eye open, tracking the room without appearing to. The photograph sat on the table between them, and Irene looked at it the way people look at things that are simultaneously a gift and a difficulty, the way the past is always both. She did not say she was struggling. She said she was managing, which was true in the sense that she was still in the house and still getting up in the mornings and still doing the things that needed doing. But managing, Cole understood from the porch light on at 9 in the morning, and the 3 days of unshoveled walk, and the particular quality of stillness in the house that was the stillness of a house occupied by one person who had been occupying it with 2, was a specific and demanding condition. She had called a handyman about the broken furnace draft that was causing the boiler to cycle inefficiently, and he had not called back. She had called the bank about the mortgage payment that had come due in January, and had been told that, because the account had been jointly held, and the account holder of record had died, a probate process was required before the account structure could be modified, and that in the interim she could make payments by money order to an address in Minneapolis. She had been navigating this for 4 months alone. Cole did not offer help immediately. He asked questions. He had learned, in years of working with people in crisis, that the offer of help before the full picture is assembled is a form of presumption, and that people in genuine difficulty deserve the respect of being fully understood before being helped. He asked about the furnace. He asked about the mortgage. He asked, carefully, about Frank's pension from the Forestry Service and whether it had continued. Irene said it had been reduced, half pension on spousal death, the terms Frank had selected on a form 30 years ago, without fully understanding, she thought, what it meant in practice. She said the reduction had been significant enough that the January mortgage payment had required money she did not have fluid. He asked who had been helping her. She said she had not wanted to ask. He understood this completely and did not try to explain why it was unnecessary, because the explanation would have been condescending, and people who have managed things alone for a long time know their own reasons and do not require them to be analyzed. The man at the bank was named Brandon Kessler. He was 44 years old and managed the mortgage servicing operation for the regional bank's Whitefish branch from an office on Central Avenue, and had a professionally neutral manner that Cole had encountered in enough institutional contexts to recognize as the specific blankness of a person who had learned to process the human dimensions of their work as administrative variables. He had called Irene twice in January about the overdue payment, and had sent a formal notice of delinquency in February, and had not, in either contact, mentioned the Montana Homeowner Assistance Fund, the state probate expediting service for surviving spouses, or the Montana Department of Veterans and Foreign Wars Pension Assistance Program that covered surviving spouses of state and federal retirees. He had not mentioned these things because mentioning them was not in his scripted process. And his scripted process was what he followed, and the result was a 78-year-old widow alone in a house with a broken furnace and an overdue mortgage who had not called her children because she did not want to worry them. Cole made 4 calls the afternoon after he visited Irene. The first was to a woman named Diane Marsh at the Montana Homeowner Assistance Fund, who confirmed that Irene's situation qualified for emergency mortgage assistance and that the application could be expedited given the circumstances. The second was to a probate attorney in Kalispell named Jim Foley, whom Cole's contractor knew from a previous estate case, who said the joint account modification for surviving spouses was a standard 60-day process in Montana, and that the bank's Minneapolis payment instruction was technically compliant but represented the slowest available pathway, and that a direct probate filing would resolve the account issue entirely. The third was to a woman named Carol Vance at the Montana Department of Veterans Affairs, whose job was specifically the thing Irene needed: surviving spouse benefit coordination for federal retirees, and who said, when Cole described the situation, that she had been in this job for 16 years, and that the cases that made her the angriest were the ones where someone had simply not told the surviving spouse what was available. The fourth call was to the Whitefish branch of the bank. He asked to speak with Brandon Kessler's supervisor. Brandon Kessler arrived at the Blue Moon Cafe on Main Street on a Thursday morning because Cole had asked him to meet there, which was not the kind of request Kessler had received before, but which his supervisor had, after Cole's call, encouraged him to accommodate. He was trim and professionally dressed, and had the manner of a man who was not accustomed to being on the receiving end of a conversation he had not initiated. He sat across from Cole in a window booth, with Cerberus lying in the aisle, not blocking, not positioned as a threat, simply present, his iron-gray form extended across the tile floor, with his chin on his paws and his amber eyes open, and conducting their quiet environmental inventory in the easy, unhurried way of a dog that is entirely at rest and entirely aware at the same time. Cole introduced himself. Staff Sergeant Cole Drake, retired, 1st Battalion 7th Marines. He put the name and information on the table the way he put everything on the table, clearly and without emphasis, because things that were true did not require emphasis. He then told Brandon Kessler what he had found in the 4 weeks since he had walked into Irene Beaumont's kitchen with a photograph and a cup of coffee, the Homeowner Assistance Fund application, which had been approved, and would cover the January and February payments and provide a 6-month bridge while the probate was finalized. The expedited probate filing Jim Foley had initiated, which would resolve the joint account issue in approximately 45 days. The surviving spouse benefit adjustment Carol Vance had already begun processing, which would restore a portion of the pension reduction under a provision Frank had been eligible for, but had not been informed of at retirement. And the furnace draft repair, which Cole had handled himself on a Tuesday afternoon, with $60 in parts and 2 hours of time. He told Kessler that Irene Beaumont had been Frank Beaumont's wife for 51 years, and that Frank had worked for the Flathead County Forestry Service for 31 years, and that the January mortgage payment had been late because the bank's process had not included the information Irene needed to navigate it, and that this had not been malicious, but that the outcome was indistinguishable from malice in its effect on a 78-year-old woman who was 4 months into grieving her husband and had not called her children because she did not want to worry them. He paused. Cerberus had not moved. "She found a photograph in the snow," Cole said. "She didn't lose it. Someone else took it. Someone who didn't know what it was. The mortgage isn't a photo, but it's the same category of thing. It belonged to her. She should have been told how to keep it." Kessler looked at him for a long moment. "What are you asking me to do?" Kessler said. "I'm not asking you to do anything," Cole said. "I'm telling you what has been done and what is being done. I wanted you to know, because I think the people who make processes ought to know what their processes produce when the person on the other end of them is someone like Irene Beaumont." Nobody spoke for a moment. Outside the window, the February light had the thin, clean quality it had when the sky cleared after a snowfall. Kessler's supervisor implemented a surviving spouse notification protocol for mortgage accounts the following quarter. A procedural change that added 3 paragraphs and 2 phone numbers to the standard bereavement contact script. Cole did not learn about this until 8 months later, when Diane Marsh at the Homeowner Assistance Fund mentioned it in a context unrelated to the Beaumont case. The probate was finalized in 43 days. The account modification resolved in the same week. The surviving spouse benefit adjustment added $212 a month to Irene's pension income, retroactive to Frank's retirement, with a lump sum back payment covering the 11 years since his retirement, during which she had been eligible for the adjustment and not received it. The lump sum was substantial. Irene put half of it into a certificate of deposit and used the other half to have the south garden professionally prepared for spring planting for the first time in 11 years. Because Frank had always done the heavy work and she had not asked anyone else to do it, and she was asking now. 7 months after the February morning in the parking lot, Cole Calloway sat on the covered porch of the house on Birchwood Lane on a September evening while Irene poured 2 glasses of iced tea, and Cerberus lay on the porch boards with his nose pointed toward the garden, his iron-gray coat warm in the last of the afternoon light, his eyes tracking the garden with the slow, satisfied attention of a dog doing what he did best, which was to be present in a place and know that the place was right. The maples along the front walk had gone to the early yellow that maples in Whitefish went to in September, before the full turn, and the mountain behind the house was clear against the evening sky, and was the same mountain it had been in the photograph and would be after everything they had both outlasted. Irene handed Cole his tea and sat in the other chair and did not say anything for a moment, and the evening held the quality that September evenings in Montana held. The particular peacefulness of a season that knows what it is and what comes after it, and is not in any hurry. The photograph was back inside, on the mantel, in a new frame that her daughter had brought when she visited in July. Frank at 29 with his arm around Irene's shoulders. Irene at 27 not looking at the camera. First winter. 1974. "Tell me how you found it," Irene said. She had asked this before, on the 3rd visit. She asked it again now, the way people ask things they know the answer to, because the answer has become important to them. Cerberus stopped, Cole said. Irene looked at the dog for a moment. Cerberus's ear, the one with the diagonal scar, was angled slightly toward her, the way it angled when he was tracking something nearby. "Good dog," she said. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they are face down in the snow in a parking lot, protected from the light by the angle they landed at, waiting for a dog to stop walking at the right moment, and a man who has learned to trust the dog's stillness. God does not always make the route visible. Sometimes he makes one small recovery, a photograph from 1974, face down, preserved by cold and chance, the first step in a longer recovery that the person who needed it could not have found their way to alone. There are Irene Beaumonts in houses on named streets in every town, navigating the bureaucracy of bereavement without the map, without the phone numbers, without anyone to tell them what they are entitled to and how to ask for it. They do not call their children because they do not want to worry them. They manage, that is the word they use. What they mean is, I am doing this alone and I have not stopped, and no one has noticed. Sometimes all it takes is a dog who stops, and a man who crouches down, and a photograph that was worth finding. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that what is lost is not always what is gone. Sometimes it is simply waiting in the cold to be picked up and carried home. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if someone has ever found something of yours you thought was lost. Or if you have ever been the one who found something and followed it until it reached the person it belonged to, we would like to hear that. Your story may be what someone watching today needs to read. If you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the grace of the small recovery that leads to the large one, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and grant you the eyes to see what is lying face down in the snow, and the willingness to pick it up.